So, Jen, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, good to be here. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too. If you don't mind, tell me a little bit about why you're so passionate about women's health, relationship to their sexuality. Like, why is this your passion?
Yeah, I just feel like there is a lack of information, like especially, and this was reinforced as I was starting to work on my dissertation, is just the data isn't there. Women's health doesn't get as much research. And so I want to contribute as much as I can to that. So the focus, there's just I don't know. I just have a soft spot. I want women to get more support on all fronts. And I definitely support men too. I see lots of couples, but
Yeah, yeah.
but women, I want to bring women into this conversation. I want to give them more support. I want them to feel like they can have a really great sex life too. So yeah, that's sort of what
And
I
if I recall, that your dissertation is about the kinds of things that affect women's sexuality. Is that right? The
yeah.
kinds of things
Yeah,
that
it's
have an
sex
impact?
therapy with women specifically. So it's looking at women and even drilling down further into queer women. So which to in order to look at that, I had to look at all the data around that we have with women and then even further in looking at queer women. So
Okay.
as a subset. Yeah.
So today, if we're talking about a number of those topics, the kinds of things that can get in the way for women, where would you want to even start? I mean, body image is partly what comes up for me, but is that a decent starting place?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is the, giant thing that is always, present for women.
Yeah.
And I gave this big talk yesterday and it was in person, which is so rare and amazing that I got to do that. And as I said body image, I could see the women's heads go like this.
Yeah.
It was just like the yes, the nodding. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter, socioeconomically, like women are just touched and affected by the culture. And we get these messages around body image, and it's really hard to not be affected. So yes, I think that is a doozy, and it's a quiet one because a lot of times we think that even really beautiful women that seem to be, you know, to fit industry standards wouldn't have that. But no, every woman has kind of most every woman, not every woman, but most women have that chatter in the back of their minds that something is not quite right or that it could change or that, yeah, that there's something, and it doesn't have to be about their necessarily their size. It could also be about, that's one of the questions I ask in my group is like, what would you change? Not
Yeah.
change something, but what would you change? The presumption being that there is something, and there's always something.
Right.
So yeah, because we tend to be very critical about our physical appearance. And
How do people answer that question? If it isn't just size, right? Like it's
yeah,
20
oh
pounds or something like that.
yeah,
What kinds of things do they
I mean,
say?
some people say I'm too tall. Some people say, oh, they pick really random things like my hands aren't pretty, or they say my hair isn't shiny, or it's like arbitrary things that you're like, what? I didn't even know that was a thing,
Yeah, right.
My lips are too
Arbitrary from the
thin.
outside, right? But for
Mhm.
some reason, something's,
Yeah.
caught our attention.
Difference. Any sort of differences are things that we tend to notice and highlight and reinforce. Certainly, peers do that at a younger age, and then we internalize that and play that record to ourselves as we go. And so sometimes then it creates this dynamic romantically, erotically, where you're like trying to like hide that part or avoid that part from being seen. Meanwhile, your partner has no idea any of that's going on, right? You're doing this whole like shenanigans to like not have it be seen or known. And it's like, it's not even in their awareness.
Yeah. Do you find that most of the time it starts with, I mean, there's a general society and cultural messages and images we get everywhere. But do you find like a lot of people actually somebody commented on something at some point in their life and that's then what they key in on?
Not necessarily. They could have read it in a beauty magazine or
Yeah.
seen it in an episode of a Gilmore Girls. They could have picked it up anywhere as
Yeah.
like, this is a thing. They could have seen it on Sex in the City, you know,
Yeah.
uh, anywhere you could have, I remember seeing an Entourage episode about Top Tall. And I was like, what? That's a thing? And it stayed with me. I'm like, you
Wow.
know?
Yeah. Well, and I remember talking to somebody on the podcast too, and they said, you can't have an orgasm if you're holding in your stomach. Right? Like the idea that we can be thinking about how do I look or, in our head in those ways is going to be such an obvious barrier.
Yeah, because you're so distracted. You can't let go. You can't move into that pleasure, that play, that if you're worried about how you sound, how you smell, how you look, and certainly if you're trying to hold in your stomach, or you're worried about your angles or any of that, it's really hard to
Yeah.
your, let your body take over and let that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does this evolve or I don't know, change or over the lifespan? I mean, our concept of self, our thoughts about body image. I mean, does it get any easier as we get older?
They,
Because we
what's that,
because we
what's that
give up.
phrase?
I don't know.
They say youth is wasted on the young.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully we trade age for wisdom. And I do find I'm 51 and I find that I'm noticing it in my peer group and I see it with clients where as we get older, we start to have some less attachment to everything being perfect. And we start to say, hey, I am valued for a lot more than just my appearance. I'm smart, I'm interesting, I'm a good person, I have other things to offer in relationship. And so I don't have to look perfect all the time. That's okay. And the larger picture matters to that because otherwise you're going to be in a world of hurt forever because but I see these tortured folks that are in their 50s and 60s that are still fighting the fight.
Mm.
But yeah, hopefully you start to kind of let go of some of that self-consciousness and that preoccupation with perfection and appearance. And yeah, there's still a certain amount of caring for oneself, but not feeling undeserving because you aren't enough physically, you know, or enough anyway, but like enough physically, because that is just a losing battle
Yeah.
with aging.
So how would you describe what is available to women if they could somehow move past these struggles or this, you know,
A different
preoccupation, I want to say.
frame. Gosh, it's a different frame when you're not focused on why you're not enough. I mean, it's interesting. I'm an EMDR practitioner, and when I think about we oftentimes start with this whole list of negative cognitions about self. That's one of the exercises that we
Okay.
and the number one negative cognition that I find that women go to is something around I am not enough. And it might be I'm not smart enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not um men sometimes will go to I'm not rich enough. Women don't usually do that.
Yeah,
They don't,
yeah, yeah.
they don't care about money in the same way. But for them, it's I'm not enough is like a human deficiency.
Yeah.
And, it's like, gosh, if we could just reframe that, I am enough. And it sounds so hokey, but it's true. It's like that is like the core negative belief that is holding us back on such a visceral level. And I absolutely think it comes into the bedroom and it comes into the relational dynamic because if you have this core feeling of not enough, then you're guarding and hiding and um, limiting how you can show up relationally, for sure.
So how do you see that journey for somebody? Because it's not enough to say, "Oh, okay, I am enough," right? Like to just turn on a dime and
Right. How do you
tell
get
myself. But yeah, how does somebody get there? How do you help people get there?
Well, EMDR is
Right? Okay.
like,
So
I
talk a
mean,
little bit about that
that
because
is an
we can assume
amazing
people know what
tool.
this is, but they may not.
Yeah. So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing is an amazing trauma protocol that I have generalized for sexual issues as well as just general life issues. But it's an amazing protocol. Lots of people do it. If you Google EMDR, you can find practitioners probably in your area. And it is for longstanding or acute trauma that gets at core negative beliefs that often stand in the way because you develop these grooves in your neural pathways that sort of take you back to the same like this equals that. So when your partner approaches you, you think I'm not enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not whatever enough in whatever your go-to thought is of negative belief about self or the world. So EMDR gets in there, kind of disrupts that, and helps you create new neural pathways that can give you a different possible thought. And basically it's really exposure therapy
Mm,
at the core. So you sit in that thought and it starts to help break that up so that you can have different thoughts. So you don't have so much distress when you're in that core, because you attach it to a memory. And it could be, if it's an acute memory, like something like an assault or a moment of humiliation or something like that, it's high intensity, but it also could just be a series of moments of feeling really terrible. But you look for a core anchoring memory, and it's amazing because it starts to just dissipate if you sit with it, if you really allow it, because normally we pop right out as soon as we attach to some sort of memory. We're like, no thank you.
right.
But if you stay with it, and you usually, I use buzzers, some people use light bars, there's different methods, but you're staying with it most of the time. I don't know if you've noticed this in your therapy work, but if you can get people to stay with an uncomfortable feeling, it usually dissipates in about 60 seconds, 60 to
Mm,
90 seconds, it goes away. And so nothing bad happened. And then when you are in that space again, you're like, oh, it's reparative. And so then you can move past that little bump and you don't have to keep driving around it over and over again in your
yeah.
mind. And so it sexually, it really can be very helpful,
Huh.
because then it's like every time someone touches your stomach, you don't have this like guarding response. Instead, you're like, huh, just my stomach. Yeah, I've got a little softness there. That's okay. They don't hate me. They don't judge me. I'm not gross.
Yeah. It
Right.
doesn't mean
Which
I
I know
can't
sounds
enjoy
extreme,
sex.
but that's what women think. They're like,
Yeah.
don't touch my stomach, and it's like, yeah, it's okay. You can have them touch your stomach, and it's sweet. It's good. It's part
It's
of
interesting. It's
femininity.
making me think about, I don't do EMDR, but this idea that what we avoid actually gets worse, like our anxiety about it gets worse. So we're avoiding those feelings. We leave them the second they show up. They're just going to intensify, right? They're going to have more
Yeah.
power.
Well, because you build armor around it, so you then can't even get close to it.
Yeah.
Whereas EMDR lets you actually go right into it, dismantle it, um, and then take the charge out of it. And then it's like, it's just not a big deal.
Hmm.
When you travel past that memory, you're like, you don't really care. You just kind of shrug it off. Then it doesn't hold power over you anymore. It's really, really wonderful. And that can help relationally in huge ways, right? Because if you're avoiding and there's all these things that are off limits, and lots of women carry stuff like this, if there's been things in the past that they feel really embarrassed about or shameful or avoidant, then it can be a really nice way to help them get through those and move forward with curiosity and openness. Yeah.
It's interesting to me to think, because you said trauma, and that's usually what I'm thinking about when I think about EMDR. It's a trauma therapy, but the idea that our negative beliefs are traumatic in a way. I mean
They're
that
more
their
they're
whole,
more built to be trauma,
yeah,
because humiliation, or not even, I mean, that sounds so big, but even like oftentimes when I sit with clients initially, I do sexual history intake. So I will look at, what were your first experiences sexually? And they don't even have to be these big, terrible things, but they might
right,
have had some awkward, clumsy moments with their first partners, or maybe their first partner like told all their friends and that was embarrassing. And so from that, they're holding some stuff, or maybe they just weren't a very good lover, or they were told they weren't a good lover. That feels like really shameful. Or maybe they were told their body looked weird, or their breasts were too big, or something like that. Like I've had
right.
stuff like that where,
Too tall, your hands aren't right, whatever it is,
yeah.
right?
Right. And then they carry that around like there is something inherently flawed in them physically. And so they're hiding from that. And so if we can go back in and get rid of that, then wow. Well, then they're just free to like, I'm good. I'm good enough. It's like, fine. It's not a big deal. Right. Something that like they really can't change. They didn't do anything wrong. And for them to then be freed up to just show up with joy, like it's such a relief.
Yeah. It kind of always breaks my heart when I think about this stuff, about the time that we lose, the time that we have let go by,
Mhm.
and lost to either deal with some of these issues or get closer to our partner. I mean, always the next best time is now, right? Like, but it's always
Yeah.
so heartbreaking to think of the time that people can spend and the energy it can consume to
Yeah.
worry about
So
things or to have that distress.
Well, and how much time we spend in our head just strategizing and avoiding and really being mean to ourselves
Yeah.
about things that aren't true or that are so small, you know? But yeah, that's a lot of times what's happening. It's implicit. It's not even actually arguing or judgment that gets voiced by a partner.
Right.
Sometimes it is, but usually it's not. It's
Right.
judgment that gets um maybe voiced or intuited and then reinforced by us to
Yeah.
our.
We're way harder on ourselves than anyone else is going to be.
Yes,
Right.
women are really hard on themselves.
Yeah. So besides EMDR and like seeing a therapist about it, do you any, and you may not have an answer, but like any other hints or thoughts or ideas for people to kind of shift, this
Yeah,
self
I mean, I think,
traumatizing ideas about ourselves?
yeah, even if I would say if you could make explicit the things that you believe, because even airing those to yourself, if you had a journaling practice, if you had some sort of ritualistic thing that you could offer up to the universe or, some maybe prayer or meditation. Because I think many of these things, when they see the light of day, they sort of fall apart. It's like
Yeah.
this because I'm shocked when women say them out loud, even in the group context, and everyone's like, what? So not true. Like it starts to fall apart,
Yeah.
right? When you say, um, whatever. I'm unattractive because of X. And everyone's like, that's not true.
Yeah.
This belief. It's like when you challenge it just a little bit, or you start to really write through it, or if you imagine, maybe this is something somebody could do on their own, is imagine a friend told you this, and this is why they're unlovable or unacceptable. And how would you respond to that? Because you're more loving towards a friend than you'd ever be to yourself.
Right, right. I was
You
thinking
know?
it's sort of like imagine putting this idea on your daughter or your friend or your sister, and it's like never, but we do it
Right.
to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So that might be a way to start to give a little bit of compassion to
Yeah.
yourself about whatever that thing is that makes you not enough. Yeah.
All right. So then I would imagine that people pleasing
Mhm.
might come up more for women than
Mm.
men and be another barrier to sexual desire and pleasure and stuff. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Yes, women definitely lean towards the pleasing side. I think again, that's a cultural overlay. I think we're caretakers by nature, many of us, not all, but many of us. And so that gets infused into the bedroom too. And we tend towards um, giving more than receiving. And we tend towards making sure our partners are happy versus, our pleasure being front and center. And not always speaking up about what we need or what we want. And sometimes it's not even knowing what you want,
Yeah.
right? It's like there's this focus on what can I do for you? And the pleasing is so automatic, right? We just I mean they've shown this in studies of we really see it actually in women and girls, and how the difference in certain ages, right when girls start puberty, and how the fall off happens with certain subjects in school. And also, there's a big delineation for women that choose to go to all women's colleges, and how they excel in like STEM. It's really interesting because when they
Huh.
don't have the presence of men to compete with each other or for, and they just they're just with women, it's like they completely behave differently. But yeah, when there's the presence of men, they tend to defer. And they do it in the bedroom too. You
Hmm.
know, that there is this when they are heterosexual and when they are, opposite sex attracted, they tend to do this deference. And they sometimes don't take care of their own needs.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes, like you said, sometimes don't even know. I mean, I certainly have had a lot of clients who have basically always treated sex like it's for their partner
Mhm.
and never really connected to their own desire or their own pleasure. Maybe didn't even question that paradigm. And we're, way past the 50s here, where,
Yeah.
with,
Well,
I don't know
especially,
that
I would
that's a
say
cultural
that's
idea, but
more, well, that's more of a dynamic of women that I would say are 50 plus.
mm,
Women who are under 50 have been raised in a different way, and they don't do that as much. because I'm seeing it sort of as the groups are aging up. Um, and some of that is because the messages have been different. Some of that's because they've been raised with more media, I think. Um, but the 50 to 55 plus at this current time um, have really been aged or raised to please their partner.
Yeah.
And that's why they're not having super satisfying sex.
Right.
And so they get to that empty nesting period and they're like, I don't really want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
So no, they just close down for business and
Yeah.
they don't know how to negotiate their needs. And so oftentimes they're just like saying hard no, like the kids are raised, my duty is done, don't touch me.
Right.
And it's trying to get them to come back into the conversation and recognize that they actually do enjoy sex
Or
when
they
it's
could.
the
Yes.
sex that they want to have.
Right. Right. Right.
Right. Right. They could enjoy sex if it were happening in
Yeah.
a pleasing way. Right. It just has never been that frame.
Right. I'm also always surprised how many women have had pain. Well, first of all, the number of women that have pain with sex is kind of astounding. But
Mhm.
there are a fair number of them that really have never mentioned it. They're not talking about it with their partner. I mean, some of them are, hey, it hurts, stop, but some people have really been tolerating that, and
They
that
just
just
think
seems
it's
like an
part of the deal.
extreme of, okay,
Yeah.
this is for my partner and
Well,
I'm
and
just
two,
going to,
because when they were younger, they could lubricate successfully and easily. And then as we age, lubrication is harder. And there's also this, again, cultural idea that you shouldn't have to lubricate if you're into it. It should just work. And that's not true.
right,
And certainly not true with any sort of longer sexual session. We can't keep lubricating. That's not how the body works. But some men get really funny about introducing lube. And so women don't want to bring it up. I've had
right,
this
right, right. Like it's
discussion.
an insult or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, what? No, lube is your friend. It's
Yeah.
very much your friend. You want it in the bedroom. And yeah, so they endure pain because of the friction. And then it becomes very painful. And they don't, that's another thing that makes them avoid sex because
Right.
it's a feedback loop and their brain says, no, thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like, but advocating for themselves to have the sex be pleasing and comfortable seems obvious, but just doesn't happen because
Yeah.
negotiating, and it's tricky too, because if they've been doing it one way for 20 years and now they're asking for something different, it's like, wait, what? Mm.
Yeah. So, any suggestions? I mean, besides just becoming aware, like, oh, I could advocate for maybe what I want, or start to explore that. Like, how do you support women to shift that role from people pleasing to wait, my pleasure counts here
Yeah.
too?
Well, they could introduce it in a more third party way, which would be like, hey, I heard this podcast and this idea
Right.
came to me that kind of feels like it has some merit. These people were talking about something that actually makes sense to me and feels like it mirrors my experience. Would you be willing to listen to this? That is a way of not having to say it directly,
Yeah.
bringing it up. I mean, couples therapy is always an option, of course, but if they don't want to go that route, then you could say, could you read this book or could we read it together? Could we listen to this podcast? Is there a way to sort of, because I think in a neutral environment, I think it's hard to just introduce it in the bedroom. If
Right. Right.
have it over coffee or if there's any sort of mutuality where you can start to introduce some of these new ideas, then I think the partner probably wants to have sex. And if they understood that this could increase comfort and therefore increase desire, they're probably going to be game for it.
I would add too that I think the partner, 99% of the time, really wants their partner to have pleasure and enjoy this. And while there might be a little bit of threat or defensiveness or what, 20 years I've been doing this wrong kind of
Mhm.
initial reaction, if you guys are in a good relationship and you love each other, your partner would be thrilled for you to have a great time. I mean, I say this all the time, you're a much more engaging lover if you're having a great time,
Yes.
that's so I
Yeah.
think partners, it might take a little bit of time, but will be really receptive to an idea of, yes, please, let's
Well, and the
explore what would be good for
frame
you.
too, if you're not hitting them over the head with like, you've been hurting me for 20 years, and if instead it's like, what would make me want this more?
Yeah.
That's a different, that's an invitation instead of
Yeah.
a, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
uh, carrot instead of a kick,
Or even let me take responsibility that for 20 years I haven't even really told you how this has been for me. I abdicated.
Hmm.
You know, it's not your fault. It's like I had a real role in this, and let's do this differently now.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, because so much of this happens in a nonverbal way. Sometimes I think the person that gets labeled as low desire, the other person sees them as avoidant, but they don't know why. And so they make up stories about it, but they don't understand it could be
Right.
pain. They don't
Right.
understand that, right? And so the pain is like you have a headache or you just don't want it, or there's all these reasons, but they don't totally understand what it is. And it could be a mashup of things, including I'm anticipating it's gonna hurt, right? It
Well,
doesn't
yeah.
hurt at the outset, but I'm anticipating it's gonna hurt during, or it might hurt after,
Right.
right? That's hard to quantify, like, but so yeah, I think it's complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else? Are there other factors that you were talking about in your dissertation or in your work that really have a strong impact on women's desire?
Yeah, there are several. So we talked about age and body image to some degree. I mean, age is part of the factors in terms of course, big moments being puberty for women, girls, and then perimenopause and menopausal times. There's big shifts in the hormones and such. Culture and family kind of being huge impacts for people. And family of origin just gives us so many messaging, so much messaging about what we should be as women
Yeah.
and girls, and what is expected of us, how we dress, how we partner, how we behave in relationships, that type of things. But there's also just all these groups that we belong to that could be faith-based, that could be music groups or sports teams, or just some clusters of groups that, community groups, depending on kind of how we pair off in those subgroups. And those typically also deeply influence us in terms of how we dress, how fast we grow up and how we present, what we understand about sex and dating and partnership and all that stuff from an early age, our standards of beauty, all that type of stuff. So that's why I'm always interested, I'm more of a systems person. So I look back at kind of where did you come from? What did you feel about yourself early on? How did you compare to peers? That type of thing. So that's one. Attachment.
Mm.
That's a big piece of it.
Which
For
again goes back to family of origin, right?
of
So,
origin.
I mean, probably people know, but would you just give a 2 sentence introduction or
Yeah. So
explanation of what you mean by attachment?
attachment theory is huge in terms of looking at your caregiving, the first couple of years of life, your main caregivers, and how responsive they were starts to help form your attachment style. And it's not necessarily fixed. You can change it over time, but it really does tend to take shape pretty early, and it can look like insecure or secure. There's three types of insecure that most people fall into, secure being the gold standard. Secure lovers can ask for their needs, they can tolerate separation, they can take it or leave it, they can tell you what they need, that type of thing. Insecure lovers tend to be either anxious or avoidant. And when I look at sort of the attachment styles, and then I've kind of taken it the next step further, which is how that works into your sexual strategies, because I think it does. If we, for example, look at the anxiously attached lover, they, as a woman, tend to be perhaps, as we talked about before, maybe a little bit more other focused. They tend to be sometimes a little bit clingy. Um, they might care about pleasing their lover, but not so much about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they might really, really want the pillow talk because that's the payoff for them is really getting that time that where they know they've got their lover's attention, and so they might physically give more than they necessarily want, but it's in service of knowing that they are loved and wanted. And so there's some of that going on. They do a lot of strategizing to keep the relationship intact because they want that security. So there's elements of that. Avoidant is the flip side of that, where they might like the physical aspect, they might like the getting off piece, but they're not interested typically in a lot of pillow talk or the relational components. And so they might be more inclined towards solo sex. They might be inclined more towards one night stands, that type of thing. They might be a little more sexually compulsive, but certainly more challenging on some of the
Is
relational.
this because they're partly avoidant of that sort of intimate connection
Yeah.
with somebody? So they might be open to the sex part, but
But
making
the
themselves
relational building
vulnerable somehow.
pieces, yeah, are more challenging for them. So yeah, it's just a piece of it. If they don't have that modeling early on, if they don't have the skills, they don't have the trust in others, they don't have the trust in self, then that subsequently is going to show up in the bedroom too. They're not going to be able to tolerate others' needs or be able to articulate their own needs as skillfully.
Yeah.
So it makes sense,
Yeah.
right? And in those relational dynamics, and we see it in the room show up, but it's like also like you make the connections of like, oh yeah, that's attachment, and we see it in couples where a lot of times anxious and
Yeah.
avoidant
Yeah. Pretty much they
partners,
pair up. Right.
like you see the distancer and pursuer kind of dynamics playing out. So
Yeah.
what else? There is also a big piece of this is relationship to pleasure and to self. So I look at people's ability to just do self-care and also to like take a vacation, to give themselves downtime, to have some, in that little wheel of like life balance. Do they have it? Are they able to prioritize pleasure? Because sex lives in like the fun zone. Like
Yeah. It definitely is in the pleasure zone. Right.
yeah, it's not in the
Yeah.
productive zone. It's not in the work zone, unless you're trying to make a baby, maybe. But for the most part, sex lives over in like like more the feather kind of palm tree kind of creativity zone. And so if people don't have a good relationship to um, leisure, they're not going to probably be able
That's
to tap into
interesting too, because
pleasure.
it seems like there's going to be messages we might have been raised with, that we all get all your work done first or whatever it could be. But
Mhm.
it seems to me there could also be do I deserve pleasure
Yeah.
and leisure, right? Not like it's good for other people,
Yeah.
but not
And so when
for
these
me.
type A people come rushing at it, like okay, this is part of what I should be doing every week, and I want to get it scheduled in. And I'm like, good luck. It's not gonna be easy for you because you're trying to shove it in there like you do with your, Peloton appointment. Like it doesn't work that way. You can't just shift into a headspace of like relaxation and receptivity. You can't do that on command
Yeah.
with your body. I mean, you can if you force yourself to watch porn and like, that's only going to work for a little while. And that's not usually how women are wired. Men can
Yeah.
do that if they really force it, but women don't respond that way. They haven't been able to make really great porn for women because women don't respond that way.
Mhm.
Women need a different stimuli profile. They need to shift into a zone that feels like cultivation. And so your pleasure side, you need to feel justified and empowered and deserving of pleasure in order to feel like you can,
Yeah.
tap into sex and erotic zones.
Yeah. All right.
Mhm.
This is circling back a little bit. You said you were talking about the difference for women who go to all female colleges and
Mhm.
taking the men out of the picture
Mhm.
here. But I'm
Mhm.
also thinking about how difficult female groups can be. Like at the time of this taping, White Lotus has played, and I don't
Oh
know if you've
yeah.
watched it, right?
Yeah.
With three women friends on this vacation, and anytime one of them's gone, the other two are shit talking. I
Yes.
mean,
Yes.
female relationships can be problematic. So I guess I'm wondering, um, I don't know. Any thoughts on how that might play into how somebody connects to their sexuality or what kind of messages they've gotten and internalize that aren't helpful?
Well, women can be competitive with one another, but if they're heterosexual, they're not dating each other.
Right.
Now, same-sex relationships are a whole different animal.
Okay.
So women are dating one another, the dynamics of competition do come into play.
Mm.
They can come into play. Role negotiation is also up for play, right? Of like who takes what role in a million different ways. In a heterosexual construct, oftentimes things are just assumed about who carries the bags and who, is on top literally in sex and who, and all these things. And in same-sex relationships, none of that is guaranteed.
Mm.
And so it is a different who initiates, who is responsible for lots of different roles within the configuration. Um, but the dynamics are very different. I would say women with women, from the studies that I read, don't okay, so first of all, they have less frequent sex, but they have more satisfying sex,
Mm.
what generally gets reported.
Right.
And they've defined sex differently and more broadly, which is probably why it's more satisfying,
Right.
right? It's not penetrative sex for the most part. It's much more broadly defined. So the intimacy is more the goal, like the general proximity and togetherness and lots of different types of touching versus just this one
Although I
thing.
think I also read there's more orgasm for women
Mhm.
in sex,
Because,
right?
and that's because the lead up is so much longer, like their foreplay is longer. And so the orgasm is more satisfying and more
Right.
likely.
Well, and they're not thinking it's going to come from penetration.
Right.
Right, generally. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's newsflash. Yeah.
All right. And you mentioned in your groups, could you speak a little bit about your group work and what kind of, I don't know,
Yeah.
what role does that have for women growing into their
So I
sexuality?
just think, I've seen so many women one-on-one, and I feel like there is a common thread that comes in. And I have found that the groups are a really great way to expedite that learning and to help cross-pollinate the learning, because oftentimes people in groups are having parallel experiences and they can say things to one another organically that just wouldn't come up one-on-one in a therapy session, right? So it's really helpful. I feel like it does help in ways and expedite the learning. And so it's wonderful. So the pleasure circle is a curriculum. So there is some structure to it, but there's also some whimsy, like things just come up. People will ask questions. Cultural things will come in, like you mentioned White Lotus, or an article from the New York Times will come in or whatever, and we'll just talk about it. So it's 90 minutes over a 6-week period. And each week I give a little mini lecture. We do some writing based on prompts I give, and then we have discussion. And so, yeah.
Cool. So where can people find you? Where can they learn about the pleasure circle and what else do you have that you want to mention for people?
Sure. Great. Pleasureproject.us is where all that information will be. And there is both the live group, which runs a few times a year. There is also going to be an asynchronous version. So there's going to be a self-guided version that people can now do. And then there's also just my podcast too, which is free. And obviously people can find, and all of that is on pleasureproject.us. They can find it there. And then
Great.
for the therapy side of things, it'd be rivieratherapy.com.
And where are you licensed? Just so people listening
California
know.
only.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah. Good stuff.